the most terrifying animal that ever lived, started as this. That roar belongs to the most famous predator in history, the king of the dinosaurs, the face of an entire lost world. You know how its story ends, in fire, in an asteroid, in the last day of the dinosaurs. But this isn't that story. This is the one no one tells you. Go back more than 230 million years, to a time before dinosaurs ran the planet. Because for the first chapter of their story, they didn't. The first dinosaurs were small. Many were no bigger than a dog. They walked on two legs, they were fast, and they were rare. If you had stood on that ancient ground and searched for the future rulers of the earth, you would have walked right past them. Because the animals in charge weren't dinosaurs at all. They belonged to a different branch of the family, the branch that leads to crocodiles. Long before this moment, a great group of reptiles had split in two. Scientists call them the archosaurs, the ruling reptiles. One branch would lead to the crocodiles of today, the other would lead to the dinosaurs, and, one day, to birds. And in this ancient world, it was the crocodile branch that was winning. They came in forms you would barely recognize. There were the Rauisuchians, giant predators like Saurosuchus and Prestosuchus, standing on powerful legs, some longer than a car, ruling the top of the food chain. There were the Etosaurs, heavily armored plant eaters wrapped in bony plates, the living tanks of their world. And there were the Phytosaurs, long-snouted hunters that looked almost exactly like crocodiles, waiting at the water's edge. This was their planet, not the dinosaurs. Now picture the life of one of those first dinosaurs, small, alert, moving quickly through the underbrush, always listening. Because in this world, it was not the hunter at the top of the food chain. It was something else's meal. The lineage that would one day produce the most fearsome animals the world has ever seen began as the prey. Chapter 2, The Great Dying. 252 million years ago, the world began to die. It didn't happen in a single afternoon, but compressed against the vastness of time, it hits like one blow, one catastrophe. The closest life on Earth has ever come to ending completely. Scientists call it the end Permian extinction. Long before the first dinosaur, the land belonged to the synapsids, the distant ancestors and cousins of mammals. Creatures like Dimetrodon, the famous predator with the great sail on its back. You have seen it in every dinosaur toy set, but here is the truth. Dimetrodon was never a dinosaur. It was closer to you than it ever was to a dinosaur. And it had already lived and died tens of millions of years before the first dinosaur ever drew breath. This was the world the Great Dying came for. Deep beneath what is now Siberia, the planet cracked open. Volcanoes erupted on a scale we have never witnessed in human history. Not one mountain, not a chain of them, an entire region of the Earth, bleeding lava for thousands of years. The eruptions poured carbon into the sky. The air grew thick. The planet began to overheat. Temperatures climbed. The oceans turned warm, then acidic, then starved of oxygen. Rainforests collapsed, and one by one, the living things of the Earth began to vanish. Around 9 out of every 10 species disappeared. In the oceans, entire families of life were erased forever. The trilobites, armored creatures that had crawled across the seafloor for nearly 300 million years, made their final exit here. Gone, after surviving almost everything the planet had ever thrown at them. On land, the forests fell silent. The proto-mammals that had ruled for so long were nearly wiped from existence. This was not a normal extinction. This was the closest thing to a total reset the planet has ever seen. Imagine standing on that ground in the aftermath, a world scorched and quiet, empty horizons where whole ecosystems used to be. And recovery did not come quickly. For millions of years, the Earth stayed wounded. Life clung on, but barely. In the early years after the disaster, much of the land was dominated by a single stubborn survivor, a stocky, tusked plant eater called Lystrosaurus. In some places, it made up the overwhelming majority of all large animals alive. A world so broken that one humble creature filled the silence left by thousands. But slowly, life returned. And in the recovering world, a new group began to rise. The archosaurs, the ruling reptiles. They had an advantage. Their legs were positioned more directly beneath their bodies, instead of sprawling out to the sides. It made them faster, more efficient, better built to chase and to travel across a harsh and open land. All of the land on Earth had fused into a single enormous supercontinent. One landmass stretching from pole to pole. Scientists call it Pangea. There were no separate continents yet, no Atlantic Ocean. You could have walked from the far north to the deep south without ever crossing the sea. And in the southern half of this supercontinent, the region we call Gondwana, the land was hot and dry and unforgiving. The crocodile line surged first. They grew larger. They spread faster. They became the great predators and the armored giants. They became the dominant force on land. Chapter 3. The First Ones. For millions of years, the world had been waiting. And then, at last, they arrived. Not with a roar, not with thunder, but quietly. On two slender legs, moving through the river valleys of a recovering world. The first dinosaurs. Eoraptor. Its name means dawn thief. It was about the size of a large dog. It ran on two legs. It had a mouth full of small teeth, and it likely ate whatever it could catch. But hidden in that small body was a blueprint that would one day conquer the planet. Beside it lived Herrerasaurus, larger, a hunter, several feet long, one of the first true predatory dinosaurs. It had a long skull, curved teeth, and grasping hands built to seize its prey. And another, called Eodromeus, the dawn runner. Fast, light, built for the chase, and they were far from alone. Animals like Bureolestes, which was tiny, and still had the teeth of a hunter. The oldest dinosaurs ever found are not in America. They are buried in the southern half of the world, in what is now Argentina and the south of Brazil. In Argentina, there is a place so strange and barren that people call it the Valley of the Moon. Its rocks hold some of the oldest dinosaurs ever discovered, and across the border, in the south of Brazil, other ancient beds have given up their own first dinosaurs. Creatures like Staurikosaurus and Saturnalia and Nathavorax, whose name means ravenous jaws, and whose nearly complete skeleton is one of the finest windows we have into these earliest hunters. How do we know their age? Not from guesswork. Locked inside those ancient rocks are tiny crystals, formed in fire, that act like natural clocks. Each one began ticking the moment it cooled from molten rock, and it has been counting down, atom by atom, ever since. By measuring them, scientists have dated these fossils to around 233 million years old. The oldest dinosaurs we can dig up come from this southern land, but others argue the true birthplace lies deeper in the ancient supercontinent, perhaps in Africa, in regions where the right rocks have not yet given up their secrets. Chapter 4. The Age of Rain. Around 234 million years ago, something shifted in the machinery of the planet. For roughly 2 million years, the rains came. Not an ordinary wet season. A world-altering shift in climate that scientists call the Carnian pluvial episode. New forests spread. New kinds of vegetation rose from the wet earth. For many of the old rulers, this was a disaster. The rhynchosaurs began to vanish. The tusked relatives of mammals declined with them. The very creatures that had made the dinosaurs look unimportant were fading from the world. And into that emptying land came the dinosaurs. This is one of the most remarkable clues in the entire story. When scientists study the ancient rock from this exact moment, something appears that was barely there before. Footprints. Dinosaur footprints. Suddenly, across the record, in numbers never seen before. At the precise moment the rains reshaped the world, the dinosaurs exploded in variety. New shapes, new sizes, new ways of living. In the deserts of what is now New Mexico, there is a site called Ghost Ranch, and what was found there is haunting. Hundreds of skeletons piled together, an entire community of small dinosaurs buried in the same moment, in the same place. They were called coelophysis, slender, hollow-boned, about the length of a person, but light as a bird, built for speed. They had long necks, sharp little teeth, and quick, grasping hands, and they lived and died in great numbers. Some scientists believe a sudden flood swept a whole gathering of them away at once and preserved them together for 200 million years. Far away in what is now Europe, another kind of dinosaur was rising. Plateosaurus, a long-necked plant eater that stood taller than a person and stretched longer than a car. It was one of the first dinosaurs to reach a truly large size. You could begin to imagine what the dinosaurs might one day become. Leathery winged flying reptiles, the pterosaurs, the first vertebrates ever to truly fly. Chapter 5. Fire and Ice. The Earth began to split. Along an enormous wound in the ground, running for thousands of miles, the planet cracked open once more. This was the birth of the Atlantic Ocean. The moment the Americas began to pull away from Africa and Europe. As the land tore apart, magma surged up through the wound. Volcanoes erupted across what would become 4 separate continents. This was one of the largest outpourings of lava in the entire history of the Earth. Scientists call it the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province. To understand what that means, consider this. It was the Great Dying all over again. A second world-ending catastrophe striking the same planet in the same terrible way. The eruptions flooded the sky with carbon. The air grew hot. Global temperatures climbed. The oceans absorbed the poison and turned acidic, dissolving the shells of the creatures within them. When the record is counted, roughly 3 out of every 4 species on Earth were wiped away. On land, the losses fell hardest on the very dynasty that had ruled for so long. The phytosaurs, those crocodile-like hunters that had waited at every riverbank, vanished completely. The etosaurs, the armored tanks, the living fortresses of the Triassic, disappeared. The great Rauisuchian predators, the car-sized kings that had stood at the very top of the food chain, were gone. The giant, flat-headed amphibians that had lurked in the shallows for millions of years were erased. One by one, the mighty ruling reptiles of the Triassic collapsed into the rock and did not rise again. And here lies one of the quiet ironies of this whole story. Of that entire magnificent empire of crocodile cousins, only a single small branch survived. One humble group of them lived on. And that group would become the crocodiles and alligators we know today. The crocodile you can see now floating in a river is the last survivor of a lost empire. Once, its family ruled the world. Now, it is all that remains. But the deepest mystery of the whole story is not who died, it is who lived. Because when the smoke cleared, and the rock recorded who had endured and who had fallen, the answer that many scientists now suspect is one of the strangest twists in the history of life, and it turns everything you would assume completely upside down. The eruptions didn't only bring heat. This is the part that surprises people. When a volcano throws enough ash and gas high into the sky, it can block out the sun itself. And when the sun is blocked, the world does not burn. It freezes. Scientists believe that between the pulses of eruption, the planet was struck by sudden, brutal volcanic winters. Periods of killing cold, sweeping across a world that had been warm for ages. When the temperature crashed, the giants of the tropics had nowhere to flee and no way to keep warm. The very size and dominance that had made them kings now became a death sentence. They could not escape, and they could not last the cold. But the dinosaurs were different. Long before this moment, out in the cooler edges of the world, in the higher latitudes where the nights grew cold, the dinosaurs had been evolving something the crocodile cousins never had. A covering. Fuzz, simple primitive feathers, the very beginnings of a coat. Many of them were already small, already able to hold their own body heat, already living in places where the temperature dropped and survival demanded warmth. So, when the killing winters came, the dinosaurs were already wearing their coats. For the first time in their entire existence, the dinosaurs looked out on a world with no one standing above them. No giants to hide from, no rulers to serve, no ceiling pressing down on them. The barrier they had never been able to break in tens of millions of years of waiting had just shattered on its own. And into that emptiness they poured. The small became large, the rare became common, the hunted became the hunters. Every role the crocodile cousins had left behind, the dinosaurs rose to fill. The predators grew teeth and size. The plant eaters stretched their necks toward the treetops. Everything the dinosaurs had been waiting tens of millions of years to become, they now became. Quickly, completely, unstoppably. The long wait was over. The age of the underdog had ended, and the age of the dinosaurs had finally, truly begun. Chapter 6. The Age of Giants. The world that woke from the ashes was a world reborn. The long winters had passed, the skies had cleared, and the survivors looked out on an Earth wiped almost clean, a planet full of empty spaces where the old rulers used to be. For the dinosaurs, this was not a tragedy. It was an invitation. The greatest opportunity any group of animals had ever been handed. And they took it, all of it. What happened next was one of the most spectacular explosions of life in the history of the planet. Freed at last from the shadow of the crocodile cousins, the dinosaurs spread into every corner of the living world. Every role that had stood empty, they filled. Every door that had been locked for tens of millions of years, they walked through. And as they did, they began to change, to experiment, to grow. In ways that would have been impossible in the crowded, competitive world of the Triassic. Above all, they grew large. The long-necked plant eaters, the ones that had begun as small, forgettable creatures like the little Burulestes, now started their climb toward the impossible. Generation after generation, they grew taller, heavier, longer. Their necks stretched upward, toward leaves no other animal could reach. Their bodies swelled into living mountains of muscle and bone. These were the sauropods, and they would become the largest animals ever to walk the face of the earth. Not the largest dinosaurs, the largest land animals of all time, creatures so vast that the ground itself would have trembled beneath their steps. Some would grow longer than a passenger plane, heavier than a dozen elephants standing together. Animals so enormous that scientists still struggle to understand how a living thing could grow so big and still move, still breathe, still survive. When you picture a dinosaur towering against the sky, neck rising like a crane, you are picturing the descendants of those tiny southern underdogs, the meek grown monstrous. The overlooked become titans. But the giants were only part of the story. The meat eaters were rising too. Early in this new age came hunters like Dilophosaurus, a sleek predator crowned with a pair of thin crests on its skull. Do not picture the small, frilled creature from the movies. The real animal was far larger and far more dangerous. A true hunter, several meters long, stalking the early Jurassic world. And it was only the beginning. As the ages passed, the predators grew with their prey. They became larger, stronger, armed with longer teeth and more powerful jaws. Hunters like Allosaurus came to rule the land, apex predators that chased down giants, the lions of their ancient world. The dinosaurs were no longer anyone's prey. Now, they were the terror that other animals fled. And between the hunters and the giants, a whole world of strange and wonderful forms bloomed. Plant eaters wrapped in armor, others crowned with plates of bone rising along their spines, like the famous Stegosaurus, swinging a spiked tail against any predator that came too close. For every way there was to live, the dinosaurs found a shape to match it. The towering long necks of the American West. These were creatures of the late Jurassic, already tens of millions of years after that first day in the Southern Valley. And the most famous of them all had not even appeared, because time kept moving. The Jurassic gave way to the final chapter of the dinosaurs' reign. And in that last great age, new kings arose. Horned giants like Triceratops, with its great bony frill and 3 long horns, wandered the plains. And there was something else in that final world, something we have only truly understood in recent years. Many of these late dinosaurs were not the bare, scaly monsters of the old imagination. They were covered in feathers. Packs of sharp-clawed hunters raced across the land dressed in plumage, warm-blooded and swift. That same simple coat that had once saved the underdogs from the killing cold had never gone away. It had stayed with them, grown richer, and spread across the family, until whole lineages of dinosaurs wore feathers as naturally as any bird alive today. Keep that in mind. It matters more than you might guess. And walking among them, at the very end of the whole story, came the animal we began with. The most famous predator that ever lived, Tyrannosaurus rex, the tyrant king, longer than a bus, with a bite more powerful than any land animal before or since, and teeth the size of bananas, built to crush bone. When you heard that roar at the very beginning of our journey, this is the creature that made it. The final terrible masterpiece of a story that had begun so quietly, so long before, with a small, forgotten animal darting between the ferns. And here is the truth that reveals just how vast this story really is. That first dinosaur, back in the Southern Valley, and this tyrant king at the end, they are separated by more time than separates the tyrant king from you. Read that again. Tyrannosaurus rex is closer in time to a human being scrolling through a screen today than it ever was to the very first dinosaurs. The beginning of their story and the end of it are divided by an ocean of time so wide that the king himself would have looked back on the first dinosaurs as impossibly ancient, as strange and distant creatures from a lost and forgotten world. For 165 million years, the dinosaurs ruled the earth. Think about that number. Our own kind in every form has existed for only a tiny sliver of that. If you compress the whole history of the dinosaurs into a single day, all of human history would be less than the final few seconds before midnight. They did not just live on this planet. They owned it for a stretch of time so immense that we can barely hold it in our minds. The underdogs had won. The prey had become the rulers. The small, shivering survivors of 2 great catastrophes had risen to become the most successful large animals the world has ever known. Epilogue: they never left. The last day of the dinosaurs. It has been told 1,000 times, in 1,000 films. The horned giants, the tyrant king, the great longnecks, all of them gone. 3/4 of all life on Earth, erased in the geological blink of an eye. The mightiest empire the planet had ever known, fell silent. And this is where every other telling of the story stops, at the ending, at the death, at the last day, but not ours. Because something you have been told your whole life is not quite true. You have been told that the dinosaurs went extinct, that they are gone, that they vanished from the world forever, 66 million years ago, and left nothing behind but bones and stone. That is not what happened, because when the asteroid struck and the giants died, one small branch of the dinosaur family did not. A group of small, feathered dinosaurs, the distant descendants of those very hunters that had worn their coats through the fire and ice of an earlier catastrophe, survived the darkness one more time. Small, warm, resourceful. The same qualities that had saved the underdogs at the dawn of their story, saved them again, at what everyone believes was its end. And those survivors are still here. Look outside your window. Watch the sparrow on the fence, the pigeon on the street, the hawk circling high above the city, the chicken in the yard. Every single bird alive on Earth today. all 10,000 kinds of them, from the tiniest hummingbird to the great soaring eagle, is a dinosaur. They are singing in the trees at this very moment. They are more numerous than the mammals. They circle our cities, cross our oceans, and nest on every continent on Earth. The reign of the dinosaurs did not end 66 million years ago. It simply changed its shape, and it continues all around you every single day of your life. Now think back to where we began. An egg, cracking open in the dark, and the roar of the most terrifying animal that ever lived. That was never really a story about an ending. It was a story about a beginning, about a small, forgotten creature in a southern valley, surrounded by giants, waiting for its chance. About an underdog that survived not one world-ending catastrophe, but two, and then a third, and inherited the earth each time because it was small enough and warm enough and ready enough to endure what the mighty could not. We call this the age of the dinosaurs, as if it is over, as if it belongs to the past. But the first day of the dinosaurs was more than 230 million years ago, in a valley in the south of the world. And their story has never stopped being written, not through the rise of the crocodile cousins, not through the fire and ice of the Triassic, not even through the falling of the sky. Everyone talks about the last day, the asteroid, the end. But there was a first day long before it, and the truth is stranger and more wonderful than the ending everyone remembers, because the dinosaurs are not a story that finished. They are a story that is still going. The very next time you hear a bird sing, listen closely. That is the sound of the first day of the dinosaurs, still echoing after 230 million years, and it was never the last.